remain silent for long. The door opened and Patricia, his assistant, entered with a worried expression. "Mr. Reeves, they're here." He nodded, taking a deep breath. "Send them in, Patricia, and please cancel my appointments for this afternoon. I'm going to visit Sophia in hospital after the meeting." Patricia hesitated for a moment, clearly wanting to say something, but just nodded and left. Moments later, 5 men in expensive suits entered the room. Leading the way was Gerald Blackwell, chairman of the board, and Alexander's longtime mentor. "Alexander," Gerald began, his voice deep and serious, "I think we know why we're here." Alexander gestured for them to sit down. "Yes, Gerald. I imagine you have some concerns about the recent changes in the company." "Concerns?" Another board member, Michael Stern, interrupted. "Alexander, you're throwing away years of hard work and corporate strategy because of a sudden philanthropic impulse." Alexander remained calm, his eyes moving to Sophia's photo. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns, but I firmly believe that what we're doing is not only morally correct, but also beneficial for the company in the long run." "Morally correct?" Gerald repeated, frowning. "Alexander, we built this company to make a profit, not to be a charity." "And who says we can't do both?" Alexander replied, getting up and walking over to the window. "Look at the city outside. How many lives could we positively impact if we used our resources more consciously?" The room fell silent for a moment, the board members exchanging worried glances. "Alexander," Gerald finally spoke, his voice softer, "I understand that you've been through a traumatic experience, and that woman, Olivia, she clearly had a profound impact on you. But you can't let momentary emotions dictate the course of a multi-billion-dollar company." Alexander turned, facing Gerald. "This isn't about momentary emotions, Gerald. It's about rediscovering purpose, about using our power and influence to do more than just accumulate wealth." "Noble," Michael Stern scoffed, "but the shareholders won't share your enthusiasm when they see next quarter's figures." "Maybe," Alexander agreed. "Or maybe they'll see the value of a company that cares about more than just immediate profit, a company that invests in its people, in its community." The discussion went on for hours, voices rising and heated arguments being exchanged. When it finally ended, Alexander was exhausted but determined. "Gentlemen," he said, standing up, "I appreciate your concerns, but my mind is made up. Let's move forward with the new initiatives. If that means I need to buy more shares to keep control, then so be it." Gerald was the last to leave, pausing at the door to look at his former protege. "Alexander, I hope you know what you're doing." Alexander smiled tiredly. "For the first time in a long time, Gerald, I think I do." After everyone had left, Alexander picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Olivia? Yes, the meeting's over. I'm on my way to the hospital. How's Sophia?" As he drove through the busy streets of Chicago, Alexander reflected on the changes of the last few weeks. His life, once so focused on numbers and acquisitions, now seemed to revolve around 2 people he had barely known for a month. At the hospital, he met Olivia in the corridor outside Sophia's room. She looked tired, but smiled when she saw him. "How was the meeting?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Alexander shrugged. "Difficult, but it was expected. How's our girl?" The use of "our" didn't go unnoticed by Olivia, who blushed slightly. "She's excited. Dr. Carrington said the surgery can be scheduled for next week." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. That's great." They went into the bedroom together, where Sophia was sitting on the bed, drawing. Her face lit up when she saw Alexander. "Alex!" she exclaimed, using the nickname she had adopted for him. "Look what I've drawn." Alexander approached, picking up the drawing. It was a stick figure in a suit, holding hands with 2 smaller figures, a woman and a girl. "That's us," Sophia explained proudly. "You, Mom, and me." Alexander felt something warm and moist on his cheeks. It took him a moment to realize they were tears. Olivia put a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle and comforting. "Is everything all right?" He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it was hoarse with emotion. "Yes," he said, "everything's perfect." That evening, after leaving the hospital, Alexander stopped his car at a viewpoint overlooking the city. The lights of Chicago twinkled below, a man-made carpet of stars. He picked up his phone and opened an email he had started writing earlier. It was addressed to all the employees of Vertex Enterprises. "Dear colleagues," it began, "over the past few weeks, I've been through an experience that has profoundly changed my perspective on our company and our role in the community. I am writing to share with you some exciting changes that we will be implementing." As he typed, Alexander felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't experienced for a long time. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be resistance, criticism, perhaps even attempts to remove him from office. But looking out over the city below, thinking of Olivia and Sophia, and all the lives he could positively impact, Alexander knew he was on the right track. He finished the email and clicked send. Then, with a smile, he started the car and began driving home, looking forward to what the new day would bring. The next morning dawned with Chicago bustling, the buzz of the city seeping through the windows of Alexander's apartment. He woke up earlier than usual, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation pulsing through his veins. The email he had sent the night before to everyone at Vertex Enterprises would certainly make waves, and he knew he had to be prepared to face the consequences. While eating his breakfast, Alexander checked his cell phone. Dozens of notifications flashed across the screen, emails, text messages, missed calls. He took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself for the day ahead. On his way to the office, Alexander made an unscheduled stop. The small, cozy cafe where Olivia worked part-time was just a few blocks from Vertex. He walked in, the bell on the door announcing his arrival. Olivia was behind the counter, her hair in a messy bun, a coffee-stained apron tied around her waist. Her eyes widened in surprise at the sight of him. "Alexander, what are you doing here?" He smiled, feeling strangely nervous. "I thought I could use some extra strong coffee today. Big day." Olivia nodded, understanding. "The email. Have you seen it?" "A colleague showed it to me," she said, starting to prepare the coffee. "It's quite a change, Alexander." He watched as she worked, her movements precise and efficient. "I'm doing the right thing, aren't I?" he asked, a rare note of insecurity in his voice. Olivia stopped what she was doing and looked directly at him. "Yes, you are. It's not easy, but it's right." Alexander felt a knot in his stomach unravel at these words. "Thank you," he said softly. "That means a lot." When Olivia handed him the coffee, their fingers brushed briefly. A moment of electricity passed between them, making them both step back in surprise. "Good luck today," Olivia said, a slight blush on her cheeks. Alexander nodded, picking up his coffee. "See you later at the hospital?" "Of course," she smiled. "Sophia is looking forward to seeing you." With one last look, Alexander left the cafe, feeling strangely strengthened to face the day. At Vertex Enterprises, the mood was palpable. Employees whispered in the corridors, casting curious glances as Alexander passed. In his office, Patricia was waiting for him with a tense expression. "Mr. Reeves," she began, "the board is demanding an emergency meeting. And there are reporters in the lobby." Alexander nodded, not surprised. "Thank you, Patricia. Please schedule the meeting for this afternoon. As for the reporters, tell them I'll make a statement after the board meeting." He sat down at his desk, turning on his computer. His inbox was flooded. To his surprise, not all the messages were negative. Many employees were expressing enthusiastic support for the proposed changes. One email in particular caught her eye. It was from an employee in the accounting department. "Dear Mr. Reeves, I never thought I would say this, but today I cried reading a corporate email. My daughter was diagnosed with cancer last year, and the medical bills have been overwhelming. To know that the company is establishing a fund to help employees like me, well, I don't have the words to express my gratitude. Thank you for seeing us as people, not just numbers. Alexander felt a lump in his throat. This was what he was fighting for. For people like this employee, like Olivia, like Sophia. The afternoon came quickly, and with it, the board meeting. As expected, it was tense and heated. Several members expressed concerns about the financial impact of the new initiatives. Others questioned whether Alexander was emotionally stable enough to lead the company. "Gentlemen," Alexander finally said, his voice firm, "I understand your concerns, but I ask you to trust me. What we're doing is not only morally right, but also smart from a business point of view. Happy, healthy employees are more productive. A reputation for social responsibility will attract talent and customers. We are building a stronger and more sustainable company." The meeting ended without a clear resolution, but Alexander knew he had planted a seed. Some board members seemed thoughtful, less hostile than at the beginning. Exhausted but determined, Alexander went downstairs to face the reporters. The cameras flashed as he approached the makeshift podium in the lobby. "Good afternoon," he began. "Today, Vertex Enterprises is embarking on a new journey. A journey that puts people at the center of everything we do." As he spoke, Alexander saw a familiar face at the back of the crowd. Olivia was there, Sophia beside her in a wheelchair. The girl smiled broadly, giving a little wave when their eyes met. At that moment, all of Alexander's doubts vanished. He knew, with a certainty he had never felt before, that he was on the right track. After the press conference, Alexander approached Olivia and Sophia. "What are you doing here?" he asked, surprised but obviously happy. Sophia smiled. "We've come to give you strength. Mom said you were having a hard day." Alexander knelt beside Sophia's wheelchair, deeply touched. "You're both amazing. You know that." Olivia put a hand on his shoulder. "You were amazing there, Alexander. We're proud of you." He stood up, feeling a surge of emotion. "How about we go and celebrate? I know a great place that serves the best ice cream in town." Sophia's eyes lit up. "Ice cream? Yes, please." As they walked out of the Vertex building together, Alexander realized that, for the first time in years, he didn't care what the tabloids would say or what the shareholders would think. Everything that mattered was there, right next to him. The day had been a whirlwind of emotions and challenges, but as they walked down a sunny Chicago street, Alexander felt a peace he hadn't experienced for a long time. He knew that the road ahead would still be difficult, but with Olivia and Sophia by his side, he felt ready to face any obstacle. The days following Alexander's press conference were a whirlwind of activity. Vertex Enterprises became the center of a national debate on corporate responsibility and business ethics. While some praised the company's new direction, others criticized it as naive and potentially damaging to shareholders. In the midst of all this turmoil, Alexander found an unexpected safe haven, Sophia's hospital room. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and Alexander had slipped out of the office early to visit Sophia before her surgery, scheduled for the following day. When he arrived in the room, he found Olivia sitting on the bed next to her daughter, reading a book. "And then the little prince said, 'What is essential is invisible to the eye,'" Olivia read softly. Alexander stopped at the door, not wanting to interrupt the moment. Sophia was the first to notice him, her face lighting up with a smile. "Alex, you came!" Olivia looked up in surprise, but a warm smile spread across her face. "Alexander, we didn't expect you so soon." He entered the room, placing a bag on the nightstand next to the bed. "I thought I could use a break from the chaos. I've brought something for our brave patient." Sophia leaned over anxiously as Alexander took a small package out of the bag. It was a book, beautifully bound. "The Little Prince." Sophia read the title, her eyes sparkling. "Like the one Mom was reading." Alexander nodded, taking a seat on the edge of the bed. "It's a special edition. I thought we could read it together after your surgery." Olivia watched the interaction with mixed emotions. Seeing Alexander, the once cold CEO, being so kind and attentive to his daughter still surprised her. "How are things at the company?" she asked softly, as Sophia flipped through the book reverently. Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. Complicated. But we're making progress. The new Medical Assistance Fund has already helped dozens of families. Olivia placed her hand over his, the gesture so natural that neither of them seemed to notice. You're making a difference, Alexander. That's what matters. They stood like that for a moment, connected, until Sophia broke the silence. Alex, can you stay with me and Mom tonight? I'm a bit scared about tomorrow. The request took Alexander by surprise. He looked at Olivia for guidance. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. If you can, that would be great. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of the hospital room, casting a golden glow over Sophia, who was sleeping peacefully. Alexander was sitting in a chair next to the bed, his laptop balanced precariously on his knees as he worked silently. Olivia had gone home for a well-deserved rest after spending entire days in hospital. A week had passed since Sophia's successful surgery, and each day brought new challenges and joys. Alexander divided his time between the hospital and Vertex Enterprises, navigating turbulent waters in both places. A soft movement in the bed caught his attention. Sophia was waking up, her eyes blinking sleepily. "Good morning, Princess," Alexander said softly, closing his laptop and leaning closer. "How are you feeling?" Sophia smiled, still a little groggy. "Better. Where's Mom?" "She went home to get some rest. She'll be back soon," he replied, adjusting her pillow. "Would you like me to read you some more of The Little Prince?" Sophia nodded enthusiastically, and Alexander took the book. As he read, his mind wandered back to the events of the last few days. The kiss with Olivia had changed everything, opening up a world of possibilities that he had never considered before. They still hadn't had a chance to talk properly about what had happened, both focused on Sophia's recovery. But there was a new intimacy between them, soft touches and meaningful glances. Alexander was interrupted in his thoughts by a soft knock on the door. To his surprise, it was Gerald Blackwell, the chairman of the board of Vertex. "Gerald," Alexander said, getting up, "what are you doing here?" Gerald entered the room, looking uncomfortable. His eyes landed on Sophia, who was watching him curiously. "I came to see how things were going," Gerald said, his voice softer than Alexander had ever heard it. "And to talk, if you have a moment." Alexander hesitated, looking at Sophia. "Princess, will you be all right on your own for a few minutes?" Sophia nodded bravely. "Of course, Alex. I'll continue reading on my own." With one last smile for Sophia, Alexander went out into the corridor with Gerald. "So," Alexander began, crossing his arms, "what brings the mighty Gerald Blackwell to a children's hospital?" Gerald sighed, looking suddenly older and more tired. "Alexander, I made a mistake. Several, actually." Alexander arched an eyebrow, surprised. "Go on." "I was so focused on the numbers, the quarterly reports, that I lost sight of what really matters," Gerald admitted. "Seeing you here, with that little girl, reminded me why I went into business in the first place, to make a difference." Alexander was silent, processing Gerald's words. "The board voted last night," Gerald continued. "We decided to fully support your new initiatives. In fact, we want to expand them." Alexander felt a wave of relief and excitement. "Gerald, that's incredible, but what's changed?" Gerald smiled sadly. "Let's just say that your story, and that of this family, has touched more hearts than you know. Many of us saw ourselves reflected in you, Alexander, the man we were, and the man we wanted to be." Before Alexander could reply, Olivia appeared at the end of the corridor. She stopped at the sight of Gerald, a worried expression crossing her face. "Is everything all right?" she asked, approaching. Alexander smiled, holding out his hand to her. Olivia took it without hesitation, interlacing their fingers. "Everything's fine," he replied, looking at Gerald. "In fact, I think things are about to get even better." Gerald watched the interaction with interest. "Miss Martinez, I presume? It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Olivia nodded, still cautious. "Likewise, Mr. Blackwell." please call me Gerald," he said, smiling genuinely. "Alexander, why don't you take Miss Martinez out for a coffee? I can stay with Sophia for a while. That is, if she doesn't mind the company of a grumpy old man." Alexander and Olivia exchanged surprised glances, but agreed. After checking in with Sophia, who seemed intrigued by the idea of meeting Alexander's boss's boss, they left for the hospital cafeteria. Sitting at a corner table, their hands still intertwined, Alexander and Olivia finally had a chance to talk. "So," Olivia began, a slight blush on her cheeks, "I think we have a lot to discuss." Alexander nodded, his thumb gently caressing her hand. "Yes, we do. Olivia, I've never felt anything like what I feel for you and Sophia. You've changed my life in ways I didn't even know were possible." Olivia smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Alexander, you saved us, not just financially, but you brought light back into our lives. Sophia adores you, and She stopped, biting her lip nervously. Alexander leaned forward, his heart racing. "I'm falling in love with you," Olivia admitted softly. "And that scares me. Everything is happening so fast, and our lives are so different." Alexander squeezed her hand gently. "I know. I'm scared too. But Olivia, I've never been so sure of anything in my life. I want to be part of your life, of Sophia's life, if you let me." Olivia looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity and love reflected there. Slowly, she leaned forward, her lips meeting his in a soft, tender kiss. When they broke apart, they were both smiling. "I guess that's a yes," Alexander asked, his playful tone barely masking the emotion in his voice. Olivia laughed, the sound filling Alexander with joy. "Yes, Alexander, it's definitely a yes." They stood there, talking and planning for the future, for almost an hour before heading back to Sophia's room. When they arrived, they were greeted by a surprising scene. Gerald was sitting on the edge of Sophia's bed, both of them laughing as he animatedly told her a story. The book, The Little Prince, was open on his lap. "And then the little prince realized that the most important thing in life is the connections we make," Gerald was saying. Sophia looked at the door, her face lighting up when she saw Alexander and Olivia. "Mom, Alex, Mr. Gerald was telling me about when he was a child. Did you know he wanted to be an astronaut?" Alexander and Olivia exchanged amused glances before entering the room. As they joined in the conversation, Alexander felt a sense of contentment he had never experienced before. There, in that small hospital room, with Olivia by his side, Sophia laughing, and even the once intimidating Gerald Blackwell smiling and telling stories, Alexander Reeves knew that he had finally found his home. The future would still bring challenges, of course. There would be adjustments to make, both in his personal and professional life. But for the first time, Alexander was looking forward to facing those challenges, because now he had something to fight for, something far more valuable than any fortune he had ever amassed. He had love, he had family, and that, he realized, was true success. A year had passed since that fateful day of the fire that had changed the lives of Alexander Reeves, Olivia Martinez, and little Sophia forever. Autumn painted the streets of Chicago in shades of gold and red, an apt metaphor for the transformation they had all experienced. Alexander adjusted his tie, glancing nervously at his reflection in the mirror. Today was no ordinary day. It was the day of his wedding to Olivia. "Nervous, boss?" Gerald Blackwell's amused voice came from behind him. The former chairman of the board, now one of Alexander's closest friends, was serving as his best man. Alexander smiled, turning to face Gerald. "A little, but in a good way." Gerald patted Alexander comfortingly on the shoulder. "You've come a long way, son. I'm proud of you." The words touched Alexander deeply. Gerald had become a kind of father figure to him over the last year, guiding him through the complexities of balancing his new personal life with his corporate responsibilities. A soft knock on the door interrupted the moment. Sophia entered, radiant in her bridesmaid's dress. "Alex, you look so handsome," she exclaimed, rushing to embrace him. Alexander took her in his arms, amazed at how healthy and happy she looked. The surgery had been a complete success, and Sophia was now an energetic and vibrant 8-year-old. "Thank you, Princess," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "Is your mother ready?" Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, she looks beautiful, Alex. You'll cry when you see her, I'm sure." Alexander laughed, feeling his heart fill with love. "You're probably right." As they made their way to the ceremony site, a beautiful garden at the top of the Vertex Enterprises building, Alexander reflected on the past year. The changes in the company had been profound. The employee healthcare fund had expanded, becoming a model for other corporations. Vertex was now recognized not only for its financial success, but also for its ethics and social responsibility. Personally, Alexander's life had blossomed in ways he had never imagined possible. He, Olivia, and Sophia had become a family, filling a void in his heart that he hadn't even known existed. The ceremony was intimate and emotional. When Olivia walked down the aisle, Alexander felt the tears that Sophia had predicted. She looked stunning, but more than her outer beauty, it was the love in her eyes that left him breathless. "We are gathered here today," the officiant began, "to celebrate the union of two souls who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances." As they exchanged vows, Alexander saw his whole life reflected in Olivia's eyes. The man he was before, cold, focused only on profits, seemed like a distant memory. "I, Alexander, take you, Olivia, to be my wife," he said, his voice tinged with emotion. "I promise to love not only you, but also Sophia, with all my heart. You have taught me the true meaning of success and happiness, and I promise to spend the rest of my life repaying all the love and joy you have brought into my life." Olivia smiled through her tears. "Alexander, you came into our lives as a saving angel, but you've become so much more than that. You're my partner, my best friend, and the father Sophia always dreamed of. I promise to be by your side in all the challenges and joys that life brings us, loving you more every day." When the officiant declared them man and wife, the small assembly erupted in applause. Sophia was the first to embrace them, her eyes shining with happiness. The reception that followed was a celebration not only of Alexander and Olivia's love, but also of the change they had brought to so many lives. Vertex employees, patients who had been helped by the Care Fund, and even some former critics who had been converted by the sincerity of Alexander's actions, were all present. Later that evening, as the party continued, Alexander found a quiet moment on the terrace. Looking out over the city below, he felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. Olivia joined him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about, Mr. Reeves?" she asked softly. Alexander smiled, pulling her close. "About how incredibly lucky I am, Mrs. Reeves, and how I can't wait to see what the future holds." "Well," Olivia said, a mischievous twinkle in her eyes, "maybe the future will come faster than you think." Alexander looked at her, curious. "What do you mean?" Olivia took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Let's just say that Sophia might be about to get a little brother or sister." For a moment, Alexander was speechless, a wave of emotion running through him. Then, with a cry of joy, he scooped Olivia up in his arms and spun her around in the air. Their laughter mingled with the music from the party, echoing through the Chicago night. And at that moment, Alexander Reeves knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found the true meaning of wealth and success. It wasn't measured in dollars or stocks, but in the love of his family, the difference he could make in the lives of others, and the joy of waking up every day with a purpose greater than himself. As he and Olivia walked back to the party, hand in hand and hearts full, Alexander knew that his journey was far from over. In fact, it was just the beginning of an exciting new adventure, and he couldn't wait to see where it would take them.